Here we are at North Carolina Zoo. My name is Dustin Smith. I'm the curator of reptiles, amphibians, fish, and invertebrates.
I'm Shaina Lambert. I am a reproductive scientist for amphibians and reptiles.
Hello, I'm John Rossi. I'm a touring drummer with a passion for animal conservation. When I'm on the road, I spend as much time as possible visiting zoos, aquariums, and conservation organizations. Now, I want to share those places with you. I'll be talking to keepers, vets, conservationists, anyone who can help me in my mission of connecting my people to animals through their people. Join me on my Rossifari. Hi, hello. Welcome back to the Rossifari podcast. Y'all, so last week we were at the North Carolina Zoo talking to Dr. J.B. Minter all about the veterinary things. And this week we are yet again at the North Carolina Zoo, this time talking to Dustin Smith and Shaina Lambert, who are honestly just going to talk to you about salamander conservation. So the plan was that we were going to sit down and talk about all of the amazing kind of behind the scenes conservation efforts that go on at the North Carolina Zoo, because obviously they do a bunch of incredible stuff. And I was looking forward to featuring all of those. But then we started talking about salamander reproduction and repopulation and all that stuff. And honestly, y'all, it was just so fascinating and so cool. And there's so much that goes into this. And it's such a weird, unique thing that we ended up talking for most of the episode about this one project dealing with salamanders. And you're going to hear all of the details in this, and you're going to hear about salamander reproduction and assisted reproduction in salamanders, which is something that you've probably never, ever thought that you might think about in life. And now you're going to spend over an hour hearing about it. You're welcome. No, you're welcome. This is actually really cool stuff. I am excited for this to head out to y'all and to hear what y'all think about this, because I think one of my favorite things, y'all know this, one of my favorite things about zoos is just the amazing conservation work that they do behind the scenes on these species that are often considered by many people to be not very charismatic. And you'll see why I'm phrasing it that way when we get into the episode. But yeah, so here are just two awesome, incredible scientific minds that are working to save these incredible species. And you're going to hear all about it, and I'm excited. But before you do, let me remind you to hit subscribe so you don't miss any interview episodes or Zoo News episodes. Make sure that you're following along at Rossifari on the socials, at Rossifari Pod on TikTok. And yeah, you could also support the pod for as little as $3 a month by going to patreon.com/Rossifari. And yeah, that's enough. That's enough. So without further ado, here is my interview with Dustin Smith and Shaina Lambert of the North Carolina Zoo.
And I've been at North Carolina Zoo now for just over 9 years.
Okay.
I just started here in June of 2023, so I'm sort of new now. Not as new as I was, I guess. But yeah, Dustin's kind of my boss, so
Okay,
I just
cool.
do whatever he says.
So don't screw up in this interview. All right, I like it.
Exactly.
So, great. So actually, let's start off with you then, Shaina. So what I like to do is talk about how you got to where you are. So what brought you here? Tell me, when you were young, did you know that were you always, what I'm asking is, were you always into amphibian sex? That's really the question. So
Not necessarily. I was born in Trinidad and I lived there till I was about 11. So you're pretty much just out in the forest all the time. My
Nice.
whole family is like very outdoorsy and we always had various weird animals and stuff. I remember when I was like really young, my brother was working with a program that would go out and survey for leatherback turtles. And so I kind of just like remember being like 5 years old and following him around, and that kind of started like, oh, I really like these, they're so cool. And then we moved to Mississippi when I was like 11. Yeah, and
That must have been some culture shock.
yeah, it was cool. But I ended up going to Mississippi State University, and I was in the wildlife science program getting my undergrad. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Everybody kind of just assumes that you have to do vet school if you want to work with animals. So that's kind of what I thought. But then I realized in that program that you didn't necessarily have to go to vet school. I learned a lot about like conservation and different like NGOs and how to get involved with those. And I ended up, I'm not even sure how it happened. It's kind of a blur now, but I ended up getting involved with a lab at Mississippi State that did amphibian reproductive biology. We were specifically assisted reproductive technology. So using various methods like using hormones and cryopreservation to kind of help amphibian populations through reproduction. And I started interning there as an undergrad and ended up pursuing a master's there. And probably the coolest part about that program was that we had the opportunity to go to various AZA zoos around the U.S. And work with some of their species. So mainly we went to Fort Worth Zoo. We came here to North Carolina. We went to Omaha Zoo. And we got to work with a lot of their amphibian species and use some of the protocols we developed in the lab to help, various populations. Like here specifically, we worked a lot with the Puerto Rican crested toads because they don't breed well in captivity. So we are able to kind of help them get going with our methods, and then they're able to use those offspring to send back to the wild. So this will probably go more into depth about that. But yeah, so I got connected specifically with Dustin. Don't know how that happened, but we ended up getting a grant that funded positions at various zoos for them to have their own like reproductive scientists for amphibians and reptiles. And I guess that's me here. So here I am.
That's awesome. And those are some like really amazing facilities. I have done some interviews at Fort Worth, specifically with, their amphibian center and their breeding and stuff. And it is, wow, being down there was amazing. And I've not had Omaha on the podcast yet. It's a goal for this year. I'm heading out that way. But, again, I've been there and wow, what an amazing facility. And of course, North Carolina Zoo, it goes without saying, is a wow facility. So that's really cool. I have to tell you, I'm so jealous of the leatherback thing. That is the animal that I have not seen like in person that I want to. It is the top of my list. It is so far above everything else. I would lose it. I cannot wait to eventually see one.
Just go to Trinidad in like May.
Yeah.
You'll see them. I mean, they're massive.
That is amazing to me. That's one thing that I've loved as I've spoken to people around the globe for the podcast is this notion that like, to me, the idea of seeing a leatherback is this weird, crazy thing that might happen someday. And you were like a kid running around, like, seeing leatherbacks.
My 2 front teeth, like on the way to go with my brother to see, like, to do surveys.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I'm curious. So I don't know much about Trinidad. And you said you were born there, right? So you had your Trinidad and your Trinamom. Sorry. But the being out in the wild so much and being, like you were saying, like you were just out there and having all that, did you find that in general, maybe the culture led more towards thinking about, not just for you personally, but like just thinking about the environment and thinking about animals and stuff compared to when you came to the States? Or were there people who cared, people who didn't?
Yeah, I think for me specifically, my family is very like conscious about, the environment and like I was always my brother. I feel like when I was a little kid, I don't know how he got stuck with me, but he was a lot older than me, but I'd always just be following him around, like swimming in the ocean, and we just were always doing stuff like that. So for me, like that was my experience. But then I know like a lot of my friends or people that I grew up with, like they were more in the city, and they, we would go out like, on hikes, and I mean, there's just beautiful like waterfalls and stuff, but it wasn't something that was kind of their thing. But I feel like I was kind of just raised in that atmosphere, so that's just what I kind of like fell into. My parents, like their friends, they just like had beautiful like beach properties, and that's just where we were all the time. So you just kind of that's what you appreciate. But I mean, it's definitely like it depends on kind of how you are there, I guess, because I mean it's a very populated, it's incredibly busy, like very built up island. So it's getting more and more difficult to find those kind of outlets, which is, it's a little bit sad because they have some incredible species, but yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on what what you like.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
But yeah, Mississippi, Mississippi too. I think people in Mississippi, because like hunting and stuff like that, that's not really something you do much in Trinidad. Like you can't really have like guns and stuff there like you can in the States. So that's not really something we ever did or talked about. But when I came here, like it definitely established like a appreciation for that kind of lifestyle, because people really care about keeping, the value of their wildlife for various, recreation hobbies. So, I mean, I think it's both sides.
That makes sense. Cool. Yeah. I one of the things that has surprised me the most that I have learned doing this, because I do not come from this background, I'm a professional musician, is just that hunting, really, there's a lot of conservation in it and people who care about conservation, and learning that was maybe the most shocked I've been during this podcast, but it is very cool and it makes sense when you think about it. So yeah, very cool. All right. So Dustin, what is your story?
Oh man. Growing up, I was one of those kids that loved seeing reptiles and amphibians in the wild, especially snakes. I was born in Miami, grew up in Central and South Florida, up until moving up here to the cold, frigid north again about 9 years ago. But I was that kid that was always outside looking for snakes, catching them. When I was younger, my mom's rule was I could keep some of them as long as they were not venomous and as long as they were not big enough to eat her cat. So as long as I followed those two rules, I had a little bit of everything in the house, mostly, native stuff, to Central and South Florida. And so I think that fascination kind of stuck with me until college. And then I was a typical college kid. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was actually originally a business major because I thought it would be great to be somebody who made a bunch of money and could do whatever I wanted to do. And then while I was in college, I shifted gears. My dad had a heart attack, and although he was perfectly fine, I just thought to myself, I could work in a business field and make money, but be stressed all the time. Or I can go to a zoo and not really make any money, but the job would be awesome and fun. But I didn't really know anything about working at zoos at the time. So I, at the time, was going to University of South Florida, and I lived in St. Pete, Florida. And so I started volunteering at Lowry Park Zoo, which is now called Zoo Tampa.
Right, yeah.
Zoos love changing their names.
Yes, they do.
And
Great place, though. Great place.
Yeah, for sure. And so I started volunteering there in the herp section, which was herps and fish and inverts, kind of like here. And so after volunteering there for a year, I fell in love with it, got a job there part-time in the same section. And to be honest, I haven't looked back. I worked there for about, 7 or so years. I started as a keeper, and I worked my way up to assistant curator of herps and fish. And then after that, I wanted to try something different. I'd been in the zoo for 7 years and graduated from college, and I felt like I wanted to get a little bit different of a taste of the zoo world, right? So I didn't want to move, though, because we were starting a family. We lived in the area. And so I went ahead and got a job at Busch Gardens, worked there for a little bit. The corporate world wasn't for me. The theme park wasn't necessarily for me. There was a lot of really cool species, a lot of great work I was able to do while at Busch Gardens, and also a lot of great people. But again, it just wasn't for me. and my list of zoos that I wanted to work at was very short. I really wanted to stay in the Southeast, and so at the time, good timing for me. Zoo Miami opened up Amazon and Beyond. And so just before they opened it, I saw that position to go down and be the supervisor of the Amazon section. And so I jumped on that. So I went down to Zoo Miami to manage Amazon and Beyond, which was a 27 acre, $50 million expansion, which $50 million sounds like a lot. It's really nothing when it comes to zoo expansions today in 2024. But
Wow.
back in 2008, it was amazing. I mean, again, 27 acres, and I don't think Miami could have done it any better considering the diversity and the overall setup of the area. I mean, it's a great section. I'm obviously biased, but so I worked at Zoo Miami for about 7 years. Started out as a supervisor of the Amazon section, and then eventually moved over to help start their conservation and research department. So that was started by Dr. Frank Ridgely and myself. He started in the role a few months before me, and then I bumped over because my passion over the years, although it will always be herps, it also is herp conservation. And so it was a good opportunity for me to both do what I was doing on the side for fun, but now I also got to do it even more professionally than I was doing before. So then fast forward to today, I'm in North Carolina Zoo. I've been here for 9 years in the same role. I came up here specifically for this job to be curator of reptiles, amphibians, fish, and invertebrates. Again, it's a very, very long title. But yeah, so I kind of sped through that pretty quickly. But I think that, with my role at the zoo, not only do I manage the collections of reptiles, amphibians, fish, and invertebrates, but I also manage a number of sections of the zoo and also a number of conservation and research programs. So I think that whole package is what brought me up here and what I think keeps me excited about this job and about the North Carolina Zoo as well.
That's awesome. I really love that. One of the things that is just a trend that I have noticed doing this podcast is that herp people were always herp people, and bird people always hated birds until they worked with one and then madly fell in love. I think I've yet to meet a bird person who was a bird person from day one, or a herp person who was like, yeah, and then one day I fell in love with newts. It just doesn't happen. You either had it from the start or not. It's really funny to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I can't speak so much to the bird side of things. I think that I could never work with most bird sections in zoos just because they have parrots, and parrots are loud and obnoxious, and so that's not for me. And it's funny because when you come into a zoo and you're going into the back areas, the bird areas are just so loud, and then you go in the herp area and it's so quiet, and there's not as many smells, there's not as many sounds. It's a different feel when you're back there, other than things like pumps and mist systems and filters and the occasional frog calling, but they're not loud and obnoxious. It's so much nicer of a sound. But yeah, again, I mean, I've been a herp person my entire career and worked with them. I've worked with other animals along the way because a lot of areas that they've been kind of lumped, or we've had mixed species where we've had herps and birds together, things like that, and even some small mammals. But yeah, with the diversity that we have in the reptile and amphibian world, but also within zoos, there's more than enough for us to take care of and learn about, and all of them are so different. And the more and more we're evolving our care and our conservation and research programs, there's so much more work to do, and that's part of the reason why Shaina's here.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I do want to talk about at least a little bit about the collection here, but let's start off by talking about some of that conservation stuff. And I know that in particular, y'all are very proud of a salamander conservation program you have going on here. So can y'all talk about that a little bit?
All right, we'll be back after this quick break.
Hi, this is Kathy Hill from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. We're all about restoration projects in progress this season on One Lagoon, One Voice. Learn about the great strides the lagoon community is taking to restore and protect the Indian River Lagoon. Each week, we dive deep into discussions with scientists, resource managers, and nonprofit leaders to explore lagoon issues and solutions. From oyster reefs to clam restoration, algae blooms to muck, you'll learn all about the projects we're tackling to bring the Indian River Lagoon back to health. Click the link in the show notes to follow One Lagoon, One Voice, learn about the IRL Council, and explore our unique lagoon.
Yeah, so the zoo obviously has a very large conservation and research program as a whole, from dedicated staff that do nothing but conservation and research work. And then we've got a number of reptile and amphibian conservation programs that I oversee. And while a number of those are somewhat established and some we're developing, the salamander conservation and research work is sort of in its infancy, but we're really excited about it. And when I talk about the salamander work, it's a number of things. It goes back as far as the zoo has been working with hellbenders in North Carolina for over a decade. And actually it's over 2 decades now.
Wow.
And so, that is mostly doing field work to learn more about what's going on in the wild with hellbenders. And I hope everybody listening knows what a hellbender is, but if not, it's a really big, unusual, flat, really slimy salamander that lives its entire life in the water, mostly under rocks at that. And they are declining throughout their entire range. But North Carolina probably has the largest population of hellbenders anywhere in the range, right?
Oh, wow.
From Georgia all the way up to New York. And so even though we have probably the largest population, they've still gone through probably upwards of a 50% decline just in the last decade or so. So there's a lot more that we need to learn about the species in order to save them. So that's one aspect of what we're doing. We're also doing some other field work with hellbenders, like installing artificial nest boxes in certain rivers in North Carolina to determine if they'll work. We know they work great in other states. Like in Virginia, they just put a nest box in the water and hellbenders just are attracted to them and they breed. They have great success rate. In North Carolina, it doesn't work as much.
That's so weird. Yeah. But also, I'm curious, what attracts, why does that happen? Why are hellbenders into it? Do we know?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons. Some we don't know, but one of those is the river structure in Virginia is different, at least in the rivers where they're installing the boxes are quite different than our rivers in North Carolina. But they're also putting them in rivers where there may be less appropriate habitat, right? Hellbenders love these big nest rocks that they'll use for literally decades. And so they're putting these boxes in rivers where there may be less rocks or degraded habitat or populations that they're trying to connect. And so they're just working for some reason better in Virginia than anywhere else. And we've seen in North Carolina, there have been a couple hellbenders that have used the boxes a few times, but that's it. Our project has not seen much success in the way of that, but hopefully that'll come with time. We're still working on that. But beyond hellbenders, because North Carolina is the global hotspot for hellbenders in the whole universe, we're pretty excited about that. So, in the Blue Ridge and the Appalachian Mountains, we've got more than 60 species of salamanders alone in North Carolina. And a number of those are endangered or threatened. And so our goal is to try to figure out how to maintain some of these species, how to breed them, and then eventually how to release them, right? I kind of break it down into those steps so that everybody understands that that's where we're at with salamanders. Salamanders, a lot of them are really poorly known. Their husbandry is even more poorly known. I mean, yeah, we know that we can feed them just about anything that'll fit in their mouth and they may try to eat it, but it's figuring out the cues to get them to breed in the wild, to get them to breed here under our managed care, because it's so quite different at times than what they're experiencing in the wild, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's the microhabitat differences, the temperatures, humidities, lighting, rain cycles, it's everything. It's the biotic and the abiotic factors that make it difficult to mimic everything. And so what we're doing right now is we have a number of species. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head, probably about 8 or 10 species in our salamander room. So we actually have a salamander room that's dedicated to salamanders.
Oh, that sounds really cool.
It is. Unfortunately, while I would love to bring you there, it's actually going through renovations right now. So we just redid the entire floor. We redid some of the cabinets. The room is getting painted, replacing some windows. We're doing a lot of work to spruce up the room, so I can't show you that. I do have another area that we can show you, one of our other salamander programs, which is not as exciting of a space, but we will still be able to go out there and check out some of the salamander work that we're doing. That Shaina is leading a research project there.
Awesome.
But within our salamander room, we do have I believe it's about 8 or so species of salamanders native to North Carolina. And what we're trying to do is, again, like I said, we're trying to learn the proper husbandry for these species, trying to learn how to reproduce them. And eventually, when we're successful, we're going to be learning how to test different strategies to release them back into the wild. So those species range anywhere from red salamanders and spring salamanders to Yanalasi salamanders, which are, I think, a lot of us, that's one of our favorite species. And I think we also have green salamanders, which are a species in North Carolina that's in pretty severe decline. They recently split the green salamanders in North Carolina up into 2 species, with one of those being even more endangered than the normal green, which is the hickory nut gourd salamander. So we want to test all these different strategies so that when we're using some more common species, then once we figure out the strategies, we're able to get some more endangered species and say that we can apply these same methods to those and eventually be able to breed and then release those back in the wild as well to help declining populations. So I think that was kind of a really quick, rapid, kind of snapshot as to what we're doing with some of our salamander work. But there's a couple other projects, and one of those is our tiger salamander work, which I'll turn over to Shaina in a second to talk a little more about, as well as our flatwood salamander project. So we're working with the frosted Flatwood Salamander Working Group, which is a consortium of zoos in AZA facilities, but also Amphibian Foundation, which is based out of Georgia. And we are trying to learn more about that species and how to reproduce them, because they are a federally listed species. They only occur in Florida and Georgia, and their populations are very small and in decline. And they're a species that I tell people that could be extinct within our generation, which is pretty sad to say, but it's true. So we recently got involved with that program, and we've recently been seeing some really cool behaviors that we're excited about. And some of that is due to Shaina and some of our crew putting some cameras in there and looking over hundreds of hours of footage to see what's going on and trying to reproduce those. So yeah, I think I kind of am a pinball when it comes to describing some of our programs, and I was kind of all over the place there, but I think it would be kind of interesting to see some of Shaina's insight as to what we've been doing lately with flatwood salamanders, and then our new and upcoming program with tiger salamanders.
Yeah, let's talk about that. But before we do, I do have one question, which is just... So what's going on with the salamanders? Is this, I know about chytrid. Is this something is chytrid a big problem? Is it habitat loss? Is it all of the above? If I could just get a quick idea of why we need to save them.
Why. I always jump beyond the why because, the why is dependent on the species and the region. But like you mentioned, it's pathogens, it's amphibian disease, right? So the chytrid fungus is one that we are potentially concerned with, but we also know that it's ubiquitous and it doesn't necessarily affect all amphibians the same, right? Some are more affected than others. Some salamanders are affected by it, but we're less concerned with chytrid than we are other pathogens. There's ranavirus, which is also a concern. The big one that I think a lot of people are concerned with that we have not experienced here, and I won't knock on wood because you told me not to touch the table because of the microphone, but is actually the salamander chytrid, which has not been found in the United States, but it has been shown to be a very significant concern and has caused severe die-offs in Europe and other areas where there's salamander biodiversity. It's probably our biggest concern.
Wow, okay.
Luckily, again, It is not here in the United States, and we're especially concerned with it being not only in the U.S., but also here in our backyard in the salamander hotspot of the world. But beyond all of that, it's things like climate change affecting the microhabitats. As I mentioned before, those microhabitats are very crucial for species that may live in an area the size of of a football field for their entire lives. Some of these species literally will only live in a very, very small area. They'll breed, their eggs will hatch, they will emerge from the water or from underneath a log wherever they live in, and they will stay within such a small area for their entire lives for generations. And so if something as small as climate changing and causing more drought conditions and or warmer conditions, those microhabitats continue to shrink and shrink or disappear altogether. And so we lose populations of salamanders and other species very quickly. It's pollution, it's runoff, it's things like that. So it is a number of things, and it's very specific to individual populations or individual species more than others. But yeah, that's my answer. It's many things, and it really just depends on the species and the population. Invasive species as well in some areas. Yeah,
Makes sense. All right, cool. So let's talk tiger salamanders. I'm excited.
All right, we'll be back after this quick break.
What if I told you scientists discovered 100 new species in the deep ocean?
Why did crocodiles survive extinction?
Megalodon. How did it go extinct?
Hey, it's me, Forrest Galante, wildlife biologist. You might know me from Joe Rogan's podcast or my various TV shows like Extinct or Alive and Shark Week. Join me and my friends as we dive into the wild world of animal anomalies and everything wildlife. Don't miss out. Click here to uncover these mind-blowing animal mysteries.
The tiger salamanders. So tiger salamanders are really cool. They're an ambystomid species, so they're pretty big compared to most, salamanders you'd probably find under rocks and stuff. They're really cool. They've got really pretty yellow stripes.
What was that word again?
They're family, they're in the ambystomid. Check me on all my facts. Ambystomid family. Flatwoods are also ambystomids. Tiger salamanders, spotted salamanders. To me, they're like the beefier, chunkier salamanders compared to other.
The family is called mole salamanders. All the ambystomids are considered mole salamanders. And so for those that are out and about in the spring, and just like us nerds that go out in February and March, warm, rainy nights to see spotted salamanders and marbled salamanders crossing the roads and breeding, those are all in the same family, and tiger salamanders are doing the same thing. So.
Cool.
Yeah. So we are trying, their populations are, I don't think they're federally listed. They're definitely not federally listed. Are they state listed?
In some areas, yep. Including North Carolina.
Yeah. So they're decreasing. So we would like to try to head start them. So raise from eggs to offspring so we can release them, in areas to try and bolster those populations. They are challenging because the offspring are cannibalistic. They will eat each other.
Oh, yeah, that's a problem.
Yes. So this is the first year that we're doing it in North Carolina. I know other places have done it before, have head started them, and I think those projects are relatively successful. But I believe this is the first or second time we are doing it.
The second time we've attempted it here, but the first time on this scale.
Yeah. So we have right now 300. Most of them are still in their little eggs. So we don't necessarily know how many of them are going to hatch, but we have about 380 eggs right now that are potentially going to hatch into little tiny salamander offspring. So they're larval. They look like little minnows to me at first.
Okay, nice.
They're aquatic for the first couple months of their life. So we set up these tanks outside, and we have these individual containment things in each tank. So two of the tanks have big filter bags, and then the other tank has what you would breed fish in. Basically, we're going to try and test out how we can raise these offspring without them all eating each other, and what's the most effective way, and how we can get the most basically bang for our buck, so we can release as many as we can back to the wild. And hopefully if we can kind of narrow down our methods, and we can continue to do this in the next couple of years and just keep optimizing it, so we can just be putting out tons of salamanders. But this is the first time we're doing it, so we're seeing We're going to see how it goes. I don't know what else about. It's really just kind of figuring out like temperatures. It's going to be, they're outside, so we want to keep them as natural as possible. But it's really like how much food to keep them from just devouring each other.
So here's my question for you then, okay? Because I know from just, sharks in tanks that also have fish that don't eat the fish most of the time because they're well fed and stuff. So I know that we have some of that. But when it comes to designing a program like this for the first time, what goes into figuring all of that out? And what do you have to do so that you get yourself, so that your first batch has the best chance that it can have? And then obviously you'll learn from that, and it is a growing procedure. But like what was your prep like? What was your life like as you get ready to do this?
Yeah, so in my master's, actually, tiger salamanders were the main species I worked with in the lab. I did a lot of like lab work with them. They were like our model species, captive bred. I mean, nothing wild caught. And I raised a ton of tiger salamander offspring, but that was in like an inside setting. Everything was controlled. Everything was really closely monitored. And still, like food, everything, all the methods were as best as we could get them, to our knowledge. And it's just, I took some of that knowledge. Dustin and a lot of our team here, they're super knowledgeable about the species and raising similar species and other amphibian species as far as like the conditions that they need. As far as the tank setups, we kind of were just like, all right, what can we put in here that we can keep them individual? How can we set this up? And I think we were just like driving the car and we were like, oh, that would be cool.
It's about brainstorming, right? So we've done it one other time, and I would say it was a almost complete failure, only because we were trying to maximize our space, and we treated them similar to the way we do our gopher frogs, right? So we had start gopher frogs, which are a state endangered species. We've been doing that for probably, I think it's 8 years now. We've released over 1,800 gopher frogs, so we're pretty comfortable with that program. We knew going in tiger salamanders eat each other, so we just bombarded the tank with places to hide. Well, a few months later, after we put them in there, we managed to have like 2 or 3 really, really big tiger salamanders. So we know that out of the 20 that went in there, 2 or 3 would survive, right? And so with this project, we said, okay, we need to set up something that allows us to keep them separated, but we don't want to set them up individually. We want to find out what the maximum number we can keep together is without them eating each other. So maybe it just means you put in 2 or 3 per filter bag, right? And so we set up a big tank that is just loaded with these filter bags, right? There's anywhere from like 25 to 50 or so filter bags. And every one of those is going to have 2 or 3 salamander larvae. That way, if we can feed them enough and we can provide them with enough shelter, maybe that'll be the magic number. And our ultimate goal is to try to make this as efficient and effective as possible for both repeatability, but also so that anybody else can set up this program without breaking the bank, right? Anybody that is involved with conservation or research programs knows that we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of time, and we don't have a lot of resources. And so with that, we want to be able to set these things up so that it's as easy as possible. We're maximizing our effort, and we can produce as many salamanders for release as possible, knowing that we're going to have some learning curves and some trial and error. But that's also part of the reason why we're doing this the way that we're doing it right now. And it's better to do it now while tiger salamanders are threatened, as opposed to in 10 years or 20 years or whenever. Hopefully not, but they could be endangered. So let's determine methods now for this project.
Makes sense. Very cool. And what was the other flat something species? Sorry, I'm not super up on my salamanders. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, yeah. So talk about flatwoods a little bit.
Yeah. So coming into the zoo, they already had 2 populations, like an older population and a younger population. I think they're about a year apart. Already here. From working with Amphibian Foundation, I think that's the program they're trying to just keep them basically. They're not really kept in captivity much. I don't think it's been a very long ongoing project. So we don't really know a ton about like what they need, how we keep them like long term, how to get them to breed. So we're just now learning the basics. But as Dustin mentioned, our salamander room is going under renovation. So we kind of had to like move some things around so that we could do the work they needed to in the room. And the flatwoods were in that room. So they kind of got moved out. And our salamander team here, they're really, which I really, one of the things I like about this zoo is everyone is really driven to make it as natural as possible for the animals, their habitats, like give them the environment that as close as we can to what they would be in the wild, which I think is how you start to get like the natural behaviors, the breeding, the longevity. So they set up this really cool tank, like a really big, I think like basically like a cattle tank for the older group of flatwoods, and just made it as natural as we could. Got some sand, which is what they would kind of, they're in Florida and in those environments. They got grasses, natural plants, gave them a water area. It's just a really cool looking habitat. And I just like seeing animals do things. So I was like, let's put some cameras in there. We just have like the Wise cameras that, they're like not that expensive, and we set them up. And started to look at the video and just saw these like awesome behaviors of like salamanders interacting them. So flatwoods, I don't know if other species do this, but they actually will climb. And I didn't know this until like Dustin told me, and I was like, look, he's climbing on the grass. But they actually like climb on wiregrass, I think potentially to like kind of scout out for food and, predation, or just hanging out on the grass. I'm not really sure. No one really knows exactly why they do it, but they're climbing on the grasses.
That's really cool.
I mean, they're just like, there's some awesome footage of two of them just interacting, which, we don't want to say for sure it's like breeding behaviors, but that's what we would like to think, which would just be like phenomenal for the species, because no one's really, if they've seen it, no one's really put it out there that they've seen that stuff. And for them to be doing that in captivity is really cool, and really just gets everybody really excited and hopeful that this program, if we just keep, working at it, we can just find that exactly what they need to start to get the success. So it's been really fun watching videos, a lot of video of, the worms in there get really big. They see a lot of like massive worms crawling around. But yeah.
Lots of footage of worms, isopods, roaches, and then the occasional salamander.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like they, I got some footage of one eating a worm the other day. It's awesome. It's just fun to see, and the whole team gets so excited, and they've done such a like good job about like setting up their habitat, and just makes us want to be like, oh, this is how we should be keeping these animals, and hopefully it'll like convince everybody that kind of bridge that gap between keeping things in captivity and the wild, because I think everybody's goal is to have things doing their thing in the wild, but if we can help out here, then
yeah. And we shared our first kind of edited video that Shaina created with the working group at our last working group meeting a few weeks ago. And the team was just in absolute heaven. They were ready for us to share it with them so they could watch it again. And then they wanted to share it with all of their partners. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that was on the call, they were asking for it so they could share with their partners and their management as well. So it was great for us to be able to get this naturalistic behavior, this courting behavior. I'm going to keep calling it courting behavior. I think it was breeding behavior, and be able to capture it to show that we're on the right track. I'm not at all going to pretend that we're there yet, but we're on the right track. But again, the goal for us is to find ways to breed all of these species naturally, maximizing our effort, maximizing repeatability, and doing it, again, like I said, efficiently and effectively so we can repeat it, our partners can repeat it. But the other thing I'll kind of bring up is going back to the reason Shaina's here is we always need to have other tools in the toolbox, right? Some of these species will require things that will take us too long to figure out. No matter what we do here, it may be too difficult for us to figure out what that trigger is. It's going to take that one thing or two small things to figure out how to make flatwood salamanders breed, right? We want those males to be dropping their spermatophores, and we want to figure out how to make the females pick them up and lay their eggs and things like that. And until we can figure that out, knowing that this species is in a steep decline, we have to look at other options too. And one of those is assisted reproduction and using hormone therapy and things like that. And so that's part of the reason why Shaina's here, which that is, you're already smiling. So that's going to lead to a lot of questions, and I'll let her jump in. But, we've used assisted reproduction for a variety of species here at the zoo, most of which we've done since Shaina's been here. One of our protocols goes back for decades that we've used for the Puerto Rican crested toad. But more recently, for some species and for the grant that we received to bring Shaina here, has been developing these strategies for as many species as possible, especially salamanders, right? Salamanders are such, this work has been done so little with salamanders that we need to really figure that out. So we started off with like spotted salamanders, and we went out and got a bunch of spotted salamanders, and her and her lab mates were playing with them for days and days and days, trying to get males to provide sperm, trying to get spermatophores, trying to figure out how to get the females to lay their eggs. And so we've continued to do that with a variety of species with mixed success, depending on the species. But ultimately, our goal is to figure out, okay, if you want to breed flatwood salamanders, this is the goal. It's to do it naturally. But if not, then we also have this other technique that will work for breeding them, especially if and when it's needed. And she can talk about that, but I'm sure you have some other questions about everything we just brought up there.
So many, I don't even know where to begin half the time. But yeah, I guess, I mean, the first thing that just hits me and that made me smile is just, we're talking about salamanders, y'all. These aren't polar bears. These aren't, a majorly charismatic species, although I will say, I think they're pretty darn adorable. But, and the idea of...
We get to debate here all the time about charismatic and non-charismatic, and I don't like the labels or the names as much, only because herps are always at the bottom of the barrel. Mm-hmm. But I will say, if you look at a spotted salamander or a tiger salamander, they always look like they're smiling, according to some people. I think they're cooler than red pandas, and I'm saying that mainly because
it's on. It is on. All right. Interview over.
But again, I can sort of understand where some people feel about what they think is charismatic or not. But I think in some respects, people think those are charismatic because they're always being thrown at them, right? There's always these really interesting photos of this behavior or that behavior, or just we're always throwing those photos of those animals. Mm-hmm. Right? I say this as I'm looking at a photo of an elephant and a lion right there in front of me, and all your red panda and sea turtle stuff. Yep. But I think that more and more people see things like red salamanders, tiger salamanders, spotted salamanders, both at the zoo, in photos, or even in their yards. People grow to love them. And salamanders, I mean, that's one of the group of animals that I have fallen in love with the most. I mean, moving up here, that was one of the groups of animals I was most excited with about coming up here. So now being able to set up a salamander room and commit projects to them, it's one of our focal points is to raise awareness too about, hey, this is North Carolina. This is your backyard, the hot spot of the world. Like, let's all learn about these things and work to save the ones that are needed, and just raise awareness. Mm-hmm.
I think that is something that I find so interesting, and I struggle with so much because, to me, when I use the term charismatic, it's almost based on. So I've been posting. I post like daily zoo photos of animals. I started Rossifari as an Instagram page years before the podcast. It grew from that, and I can tell you I've posted big smiley salamanders and gotten 20 likes. And then I post the worst red panda photo I've ever taken and get 200, 400 likes, and 30 shares. And it's this interesting thing that I originally, one of my big goals with Rossifari was to, like you said, share as many different things as possible. And then I was like, oh, but if I go 2 weeks without a red panda, my overall, not just do my fans yell at me, but my views go down so much that it's actually hurting the salamander pic that I share and stuff. And so it's always interesting. And I hate social media. Since I started using it for conservation stuff with Rossifari, I've basically completely given up my own. I still have it. Once in a blue moon I post, usually to tell people to look at animal stuff or to go see a gig I'm doing. But like, I really hate it, but it's also necessary. But then the algorithm keeps changing, and you could spend, I mean, I've done entire episodes with PR people just talking about how do you make a salamander more popular, or how do you make people care as much about an octopus as they do about a tree kangaroo or whatever. And, I get
totally
it's
fair.
so crazy.
It's something that we've talked about, one way or another my entire career, because, my goal is to bring more herps into zoos, awareness and conservation, right? Those to me all go together. And so if that means we have to have elephants here and gorillas, then that's fine. If that's what it takes to bring people in the door to show people, what we're doing for some of these other species. And obviously I'm just joking, because we have some amazing conservation and research work as well with our elephants and our gorillas here, specifically with those two species at the zoo. So I think that's great. But I also think that we can't underappreciate all the others just because they're not furry or cuddly, or I'm not even going to say the C word. I'll let one of y'all say the C word when it comes to, I don't say that word. No, I agree. But I think too, if you value the red panda in a zoo, you also have to value the fact that they're not in as steep decline as something as a flatwood salamander, where we'll have red pandas for your entire lifespan and my entire lifespan, but we may not have frosted flatwood or reticulated flatwoods in our lifespan. And that's something seriously to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So if we need to bring red pandas in to bring people in to save salamanders, then we should get red pandas in.
I love that though. I feel like that's what we need, is everybody hyper focused on their thing, like small groups doing the amazing work. And yeah, I think that's actually really cool. So let's talk about figuring out assisted reproduction for salamanders, which as a professional drummer should not be a thing I'm ever talking about, but here we are and I'm fascinated. So tell me, I don't even know what to ask. So just tell me.
Okay. So I guess to start, salamanders, well, all amphibians really, the issue we have with breeding them in captivity is, well, we think their main driver is weather and air pressure, for the flat or for the spotteds and everything to start breeding. It's like that first warm rain. It's like they just know, it's starting to warm up. It's like end of February. It's raining. They're all going to just there's going to be hundreds of them in the ponds just doing their thing. So we assume weather. And it's like that for a lot of amphibians. They really, really rely on very, very specific cues to kind of get their whole system and hormones and stuff naturally flowing for them to do their thing.
And let me just jump in there. So yeah, along those lines, I don't know if you have the ability to share, videos through both the podcast or through your social media, but we'll give you a video that we got a few weeks ago. Shaina and I were out looking for frogs for another assisted repro project. And while we were out, the spotted salamanders were breeding, right? So one of those February nights where it's above 55 degrees and it was raining during the day and into the night, we went out and they were just everywhere. Male salamanders were filling the pond, going crazy. They were dropping spermatophores everywhere. It was a really cool experience. Even if you're not a nerd, it's a cool experience to be out there and just know that every step you're taking, there's these salamanders that are, 8-10 inches long that are just all in the pond, swimming around. Hormones are just raging. They're super excited. And so that's what we need to figure out how to repeat, right? It's how do we repeat that? And the other thing to consider is the reason why they're breeding then is because those ponds they're breeding in are ephemeral ponds, right? That means that they dry up for part of the year. And so in the winter, in some areas, they're relying on snow melt. For us, they're relying on heavy winter rains to refill the ponds. So in the fall, the ponds start to fill, marbled salamanders, eggs start hatching. And then in the late winter, early spring, all the spotteds migrate to these ponds literally by the 100. And that's when they start breeding. So it's simulating those natural behaviors and that reproductive behavior that we're trying to do. So sorry to jump in there, but I just want people to realize that we're trying to simulate. It may not be the migration of the wildebeest, but the migration of spotted salamander from breeding is still pretty cool.
That is really amazing. That's really cool. And you're mentioning dropping spermatophores and stuff. So like, what kind of reproduction are we talking about? If we were able to get fully natural reproduction, not assisted, how do salamanders reproduce?
So they're internal. So most frogs and toads reproduce, or reproduction happens externally. Basically, the female lays eggs and the male will like fertilize those eggs through like basically urinating on them because they have sperm in their urine. But for salamanders, no one like really truly understands the like specific complexes of it. But basically, males produce a spermatophore, which is like this little compact jelly-like thing of just a ton of sperm, and females will pick it up with their cloaca, and some sort of whatever reaction happens inside that when the female lays the eggs, they're fertilized because the female has picked up that spermatophore, it activates it somehow, and when she lays, the eggs are fertilized.
That's amazing.
Except for hellbenders, they're actually like frogs and toads, they're external fertilizers.
Okay.
But yeah, for the most part, most salamanders, like tiger salamanders, spotted, those are all internal fertilizers. So the male lays a spermatophore, the female picks it up, eggs are laid, and they're fertilized.
Okay, so next question, because I'm coming from, I'm a human, so I know how that works, and I talk to a lot of mammal people and stuff. So, is there any like choice of mate? And I guess it's one of my questions, like, or is it just like, the salamander will leave a spermatophore and like wander away, and then if a lady happens to come by and see it, she grabs it and like. It's just all kind of random that way.
So it actually depends on the species. So
Okay.
some species, they have this whole like courtship dance and they follow each other around. They do like a little canoodling and they touch each other with their tails, and the male will like lay it and the female will like pick it up specifically from that male. But then some, they just like, they're all together in the pond and they're just doing this like crazy madness, and spermatophores are being laid and females are coming by and picking them up, and they can actually like pick up multiple and stuff. So it really is like super species dependent.
Okay, that's really cool. I apologize for using this word, Dustin, but the idea of the little tail dance and everything is really cute. Like, it is what it is.
And that's what we thought we potentially saw in our flatboard video. So that's why we got like really excited.
Yeah,
We
that's
saw them
cool.
just like intertwining and doing their whole little potential thing.
Yeah,
So.
and then sometimes there are just big pond salamander orgies. Cool,
Basically,
whatever.
I
Like
didn't want to say
that's.
the word, but that's basically what happened.
I'm saying the word.
Exactly what we saw the other night. That was the beginning stages of that, and then, like I said, that was about 2 weeks ago, and then I went back to that same pond a couple nights ago, and the pond is just loaded with spotted salamander eggs.
Yeah.
And it's one of the zoo's properties. So the zoo, obviously, we've got a lot of land. We have over 2,800 acres, and we
I did not know that.
Yes,
I know it's a large place,
Yes.
but wow.
Yeah, we have a lot of land, and luckily, much of that land is completely natural. It's, Piedmont hardwood forests, and we have a number of ephemeral ponds. And so at one of our property, Ridges Mountain, which is about 15 or so miles from the zoo, I was out there the other night, and like I said, there were probably, at least 100 egg masses of spotted salamanders out there from that night of lovemaking.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah. But it also gets tricky. So when you're trying to do assisted repro, you have like basically like every species, like even if they're within the same family, like they're so different on how they reproduce and what they need to reproduce. It's like you need a protocol for like, sometimes you can have like a protocol and it's like, oh, it works for like these three, but it's like everything is so species specific as far as what they need. It can get really complicated.
And these techniques, a lot of them were designed with anurans, right? With frogs and toads. And so, she has this protocol for this species of frog and this protocol for this species of toad. And it's like, okay, if I give this male hormone, he will definitely give us sperm within 30 minutes or 2 hours, and then it will peak and then it will slow down. And then with this frog, it may be a longer window. But with salamanders, it's just, at this point, it's just
TBD.
Yeah. It's just shooting it in the dark and let's see what happens. And so that's why we're still in the early stages of, again, both doing it naturally, but also this tool that we have in the toolbox. It's not something that we should forget about. It's the reason why we have the number of Puerto Rican crested toad populations in the wild. It's the reason why Wyoming toads are, although the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service still classifies them officially as extinct in the wild, the reason why Wyoming toads are still in existence is because of zoos and assisted reproduction. So there's definitely benefits to it, but it's not always easy to figure out. You also have to think there's over 8,000 species of amphibians. That's a lot of different reproductive methods. The reproductive biology is so different. Again, some are reproducing internally, some are externally. Then, to throw things for a loop, some species reproduce and there's no larval stage. They hatch out as baby frogs or baby salamanders, whereas some people think that all frogs and toads, they go into the water, they lay their eggs, they hatch out as little tiny tadpoles. But that's not the case with all of them. Again, some of them don't have to go in water their entire lives. And we have a number of those salamanders in North Carolina that are direct developers, even right here in our literal backyard, that don't need to go in water to breed. So trying to figure all that out it can be stressful sometimes.
Do you have any specific questions for assisted reproduction? It's such a big genre. I can go in any direction and start talking for 10 hours. So
I mean, yeah, this is your entire career, and we're trying to spend 5 minutes covering it. So respect. But I guess just my question is the thing that I'm fascinated by in hearing all of this, and especially where you're at in the early stage with all of it right now, is just how do you start? I feel like the biggest issue that I would have with this, I mean, this is true with starting a podcast, even with anything, is paralysis by analysis, right? And like you said, there are 8,000 amphibian species, and even all the salamanders doing things differently. Man, I can tell you, most primates reproduce basically the same way. We know how this works. There was just a gorilla born by C-section by a human doctor, right? This stuff happens, and you're talking, I'm amazed to hear that salamanders literally, when I'm well, do they do it this way or this way? You're yes, and also this way and this way. And yeah. So how do you start? How do you figure it out for each one? What goes into that? I'm fascinated by what you're thinking as you start.
Right. So assisted repro has actually been around longer than you would think. I believe the first records of it are from the 80s.
Okay.
Like Dustin said, a lot of the work has been focused in frogs and toads. And there's years of research, and, there's I know in different regions like Australia, San Diego Zoo, there's a lot of facilities that have been working on assisted repro for quite a while. So the lab that I came from when I got my master's specifically, the lab has been there for, I want to say 10 or more years working towards assisted repro, developing protocols. So, we have a model species, we'll have a common toad, and we, try to figure out protocols like hormones, timing. We look at sperm concentration and compare okay, if we give this, it takes them this long to go. And, we can then take that and fertilize the eggs, and we have this % hatch rate, or we do, cryopreservation, because we also want to be able to preserve valuable genetics for potential use later on. So we work with those model species. We have toads, we have some, frogs. We had, like I said, tiger salamanders in the lab, and we just keep tweaking basically. So we have a protocol that we developed in tiger salamanders. And we took that protocol, we came here, we're we want to work with spotted salamanders. We worked with the spotted salamanders. The first time we came here, total failure. Did not work at all. So we're okay, well, tweak it a little bit, do a little bit of research. This lab, they had success doing this. So we came back with some different protocols, a little bit of timing. We collected some more spotted salamanders and tried it with them. And I was just please work, please work, please work. And then it worked. And it sort of worked, So it's basically we just kind of start with all right, we know this works with this species, and then let's try it with this species. They're kind of, they're both ambistamids, like we mentioned before. Okay, so that it can transfer to this, and then we try transfer it to this, and you kind of just keep tweaking things until you can. It's definitely overwhelming. It's definitely all right, is this going to work? Is it going to be successful? Especially when you start to work with species that you really want offspring for, because it's going to help those wild populations. It can be kind of nerve-wracking. Please just behave and do the thing. But
so I won't get into the details, but I will just tell you that a few years back we did reproduce spotted salamanders, And she did it using basically in vitro fertilization, right? Collected sperm from a male, collected eggs from a female, fertilized them in a petri dish, and then we produced spotted salamanders. I think we actually ended up sending some of those to another zoo because they're not a rare species. We weren't going to go reintroduce them back into the wild because there's bazillions of them around here. But we did that because, again, they're related to flatwood salamanders and a couple other rare salamanders, and we thought that would be great for the future. So, but now that I've said that, I think you should tell them what it means when you collect eggs, when you collect eggs from a female and sperm from a male. What you want to describe that? She was nervous about describing that beforehand, so that's part of the reason why I want her to.
So basically, like, one of the big things we do, especially that's really beneficial for some of these programs, is we can do, like you said, in vitro fertilization, which is basically just that. Like, we can administer hormone to the female. She'll start to lay eggs. We can collect those eggs in like a little petri dish, and we can get sperm from a male and just collect it and put it on the eggs, and hopefully that they, develop and they're fertilized and they hatch into offspring. And that's been really successful in some species, especially if you have, an individual that has a disease. You don't want to transfer that disease so the animals can't touch, but you can make the offspring without transferring that disease.
Oh, that's so cool.
Genetics. He just wants me to talk about how we collect sperm from salamanders.
Yeah, do it.
But I'm going to let you say what you wanted to say. Basically, we can administer hormone, and so spermatophores are like a really complex thing that they kind of do naturally. But when we give hormones to most of salamanders, we can collect what's called milt, which is basically like a liquidy substance of a spermatophore, which is like exactly what you think it would look like. But yeah, we can stimulate them to provide that milt. But I think Dustin really wanted to describe his description of how you collect sperm from salamanders.
When they do that, they with salamanders, they do a lot of massaging. It's very sensual massaging that they do. And so, but what I find interesting as the outsider when they first started coming in is, they first collect the sperm, as you were asking before, what is your method, right? So they're testing this method, they use this hormone, and then they collect a little bit, and then they look at it under a microscope, and they've got the screen they're looking at, and she is actually in there counting sperm to determine motility and volume, things like that. And so we're actually not just literally trying to get that animal to give us sperm and this one to give us eggs. It's actual science. There's research behind it. Yeah. And so they're evaluating it at every single level, from the time they give you the sperm, how long they give sperm, and they have these repeated schedules where they're constantly looking at it so that we know when they peak, we know when it falls off, so we know exactly when we need to do it. And it's literally a schedule. It's a complete schedule. Like I asked her the other day, because we're trying to do this right now with an endangered native frog called the ornate coarse frog. And so I said, okay, what time are you coming in? What time do you need to do your injections? Because it's literally they'll be giving us the best sperm at 4:00. So we need to be ready at 4:00 to do this, and then this and this. So it's very much a rigorous project. And
they don't listen most of the time.
Yeah, they don't listen most of the time.
But yeah, he just wanted to say that I give salamanders sensual massage, basically.
Yeah. That makes sense, and might be the title of the episode. So, you never know. No, that makes a lot. I mean, honestly, it's funny, and it is. We like to joke around on this podcast and make my dad jokes. We do all the things. But it is also fascinating. And, I think, people worry about anthropomorphism and in the zoo world, and to a degree, yes, and to a degree, no, in my opinion, because I do think it helps to connect with that. Your job at some point, while being very scientific and very scheduled and everything, is to give sensual massages to salamanders, because that is what it will take to save them. And I do think that is something that everyone can relate to, honestly. It's a silly way to say it. It is a little funny. But that's amazing. And I know, I've talked to the elephant team at the Columbus Zoo, and they do a lot more than just a sensual massage, y'all. But you know what? It works. And we need that to keep the population going and to learn about elephant reproduction. And, I think it's a very cool, very real thing that is worth mentioning. This isn't a kid's podcast. We can joke around here. We can have some fun with that, but that's really cool. And, yeah, I promise I won't, assume anything about your dating life because of it.
I mean, like, it was I think it was in when I was giving my master's defense that my advisor said, like, that basically is how I got my master's positions. Because when I was an intern, I was just good. The student I was working under, her whole project was based on evaluating the salamander sperm, but to evaluate it, you have to be able to get it. And I just helped her out one day. I was just like good at getting it from them. And she was like, all right, every time I need to get this, you better be here because I need you to get it from them. And I was like, okay. And then I got a master's position. So really, that's all you have to do.
I mean, girls got skills, whatever, it works. No, that is really fascinating. That's really cool. So we are going very long and I want to keep going longer. We didn't even get to the collection here. So let's do another interview down the road. I will be back in North Carolina. I want to hear about the progress with the research and also talk about more of the collection here. But I know we're going to go and check out some stuff. But real quick, do you want to talk about the other conservation stuff here, just to give people like a very nice overview of what else is going on here?
Yeah, so we're excited about many of our conservation research programs. I've already kind of touched on the gopher frogs, but we've been head starting gopher frogs in North Carolina. They're a state endangered species, and we've been doing that now since 2016. So it's been 8 years for us. And we currently, right at this moment, we have 6 or 7 or 8 egg masses that we're getting ready to hatch out to raise. So what we do is, every year when gopher frogs breed, which is right around February, March-ish in North Carolina, with a few occasional fall breedings if we get a really nice hurricane. Most people don't think of hurricanes as being nice, but we sort of look forward to them for amphibian conservation in some ways. And so with our gopher frog project, we have egg masses that we collect portions of from the wild. We raise them up 50 tadpoles per tub. And then at the end of the summer, when they emerge as little tiny frogs from our big tanks, which are called mesocosms, then we release them back in the wild. So to date, we've released just over 1,800. So that's one of our backyard projects. Again, we're starting to do that with tiger salamanders. We're trying to do it with ornate chorus frogs as well, another state endangered species. And so those are a couple of our backyard conservation projects in addition to the trial work with salamanders, research with hellbenders. But then a little further away in a much warmer area, we also work in the Caribbean with a few species. So our primary projects right now in the Caribbean are Puerto Rican crested toad conservation and also survey work. So I go to Puerto Rico twice a year to work with our partners on the recovery program. So right here at the zoo, we breed Puerto Rican crested toads every year, and we send tadpoles back to Puerto Rico. This last year we did 3,000 tadpoles, about 3,000.
2,500.
It gets hard to count once you get past the first 5 or 10. They move around a lot. And so altogether, though, the project as a whole has been worked with in zoos all around the U.S. for decades now, right? We've released we're over 800,000 tadpoles in the last few decades, and we've established multiple new populations of crested toads. And then also our more recent project, which is one that I'm really excited about, is the Virgin Island boa. So people think about boas and they think about this giant snake that, maybe eating people, things like that. I hope they don't think boas are eating people, but people don't know. When they hear boa, they just think giant snake and scary. Right. Virgin Island boas are very small though, like the size of a corn snake and smaller. They're only found on a few islands in the Caribbean. And so we are reinvigorating a conservation program that was once successful a few decades ago. It kind of waned for a while, and then we've restarted it. So we have a population of breeding Virgin Island boas here. We're evaluating places in the Caribbean to reintroduce them, along with a couple of our partners. But we're leading that project. We're leading the charge on that. So we're really, really excited about the Virgin Island boa project. And we also have a few local projects that go on right here on zoo grounds. So we monitor a few different species of snakes because, again, we have a lot of land, a lot of wildlife. And then also one of our staff, Dr. Betsy Rosnick, she's one of our conservation and research coordinators here at the zoo. She's been leading salamander surveys at the zoo. And I think she started that about 2 or 3 years ago. And she has seen, I think it's 8 different species, including one imperiled species that we had never documented at the zoo before. So we're pretty excited about that. She found 4-toed salamanders.
Nice.
And she has seen hundreds and hundreds of salamanders now to date. So those are just a few of our more exciting and impressive programs that we did get to touch on today that hopefully you'll be coming back for, and we can talk about Virgin Island boas and crescent toads and gopher frogs and some of our other programs.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And it is time.
It's time now, don't you know? We've come to the end of the show, but there's one tale left to go. You're gonna laugh and say, oh no. It's time for the Rossifari poop story.
Do you want to start? You have more weird stories for your assisted reproduction work.
A ton of poop, but
It doesn't have to be poop, just gross.
I get a lot of pee, like
Do it.
frogs. Like obviously, if you ever held a frog, like they pee on you.
Yes.
You know? And actually, that's how they release their sperm is in their pee. So when we're collecting sperm from them, you basically you pick them up and they pee, and that's how you collect it. But when you're working some of those bigger ones, like the Colorado river toad, it's like a fire hydrant. And, you get it in your mouth. You get
Oh, no.
you just get it everywhere, and you're just soaked in frog or toad urine all the time. That's the nasty stuff.
It's good. I mean, I bet that a lot of the people listening right now know that they've been peed on by a frog, but don't know that it's had special bonus content. So, yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
It won't cause warts. Just keep that in mind. It's something else. It's something else.
I don't have one yet.
There you go. I don't know. I mean, I've been in the zoo field now for 24 years, and I can't think of anything. And I guess it's probably part of it because it's just normal every day, right? Every day for us is so completely different and unique. I think.
It's a lame answer.
I know it is. It is totally lame, but I'm thinking. I should have. I actually, when you brought this up before, I had one, and I thought it would be a really good one, and it has since left because of all of this talk about sensual massages and everything else.
All right, well, let's do this.
Why don't we come back to that?
Yeah, I'm gonna say
one before
I
we're
can
done.
tell one for you. We had to move all those salamander tanks out of there, and they're very natural, so the water is constantly flowing stuff, but it's very stinky with a lot of salamander poop and various things. And when we were moving them up, we especially made sure that when we were moving the tanks, Dustin was on the side with the drain hole, so his pants were soaked for 3 days and just nasty stuff.
Every single day, we pick up a tank.
Oh, no.
On that side of the tank.
Oh, see, that's a good one. Yeah.
To me, that's a normal day.
Well, I know.
It's just a normal day.
I know. But that is actually really great. Thank you for saving his butt. I have the feeling you do that a lot working with him, but that's besides the point. So thank you both very much for this. Let's go out. Let's go see some stuff.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, so we're here with some of these very, very tiny tiger salamander babies, and they're there. Some have hatched and some have not. And these are the ones that you're going to move, like we were talking about earlier, and kind of segregate. So there are 2 or 3 in each place, and that will hopefully help them not eat each other, ? And here's my question. They are very small. They are the size of my fingernail, maybe the length of a fingernail, and I bite my fingernails. So not great. And there are a bunch in each one of these containers. So how do you move them safely, 2 or 3 into a container? What is the process like?
They grow pretty quickly. So they'll be a little bit bigger when we go to move them, but I don't know how are we going to move them.
It's a combination of being A, very careful, B, either nets, or C, our special device that's custom made for us is right behind us, and it's a turkey baster.
Yes, it is.
So what a lot of times we'll do when we're moving a lot of these things, whether it's an egg, a tadpole, larvae when they're really small and young, is just really, really slowly sucking them up with a turkey baster.
Oh my
Again,
gosh.
sometimes we'll do that. A lot of times we don't have to. A lot of times we can just get them in a net. Sometimes it's more difficult when, say, there's 150 in a small tub. But luckily, with each one of these, I don't think we have more than 30 or 40 eggs in an individual tank.
Okay, yeah. And so are these, I'm not, again, not a salamander expert here by any means. So would these be called larvae is the correct term? They're not because they look like tadpoles.
Correct.
They
Yep.
just look
Larvae,
like
yeah.
tadpoles. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So
there's a
larvae.
lot of colloquial names for the larva, but larva's good enough.
Okay, cool. Very good. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And yet again, for those listening who can't see this, I love to always say this, but like, we're in a shed. It's a very nice shed. It is a very modern shed. I like it, but here is this, hope for multiple species, and we're in a shed. You could buy this at Lowe's for like $400 and build it in your backyard. And
well, this one costs a lot more than that, but it is a shed.
Okay, fair. I'm not great at pricing sheds, apparently. I don't know.
And the reason for this is because they're only indoors for a few weeks. We don't want them in here very long. We do not raise any of our amphibians that are being released indoors except for our Puerto Rican crested toads. All of our native species are raised outdoors. So just outside of our fancy shed are our mesocosms, which are our 300-gallon tanks. And so in the next couple weeks, once the salamanders have all hatched, once the larvae have all hatched and they're all eating, then they'll go outside and we'll acclimate them kind of the way you would your fish at home, except we don't drop the bags in the water. We'll go through a slow acclimation for everybody so they get used to these outdoor temperatures, which they mostly are because our super fancy shed is not climate controlled. It's just, we just keep it from freezing. Otherwise they're going to come out here pretty soon. We'll have to watch their growth rate to determine when they're going to start eating each other, because they won't start eating each other right now.
Okay.
They're too small. They're too young. They're eating really tiny things. And for anybody listening who doesn't know what a larval tiger salamander looks like, it looks like a mini axolotl, which axolotls are probably what you would call charismatic. And so I think people like those a lot. So if you think about a tiger salamander, think about a little version of an axolotl when they're juveniles.
That's a great description. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very cool. All right. I did have one other question, just as you guys were talking about this stuff that kind of blew my mind. So y'all are here and y'all are, at the zoo.
With a kookaburra in the background.
With a kooka. Yeah, I like it. And you're talking, though, about like how you guys go out at night and like explore and figure this stuff out. So like, for lack of a better word, what is your schedule? Like, if that makes sense to ask, you know what I mean?
I mean, we work, like, during the day, we're here on a regular schedule, but, we kind of do this stuff for, it's your job, but it's also your hobby.
Right. Yes, I know, very much. My entire life is having jobs that are hobbies and vice versa. So, yes, I do get it.
Like, the other night, a couple weeks ago when we went out, like, that was just for fun, basically, for work / for fun.
Yeah. Nice. It was for work because one of the projects we're working on, again, as we've talked about a lot already in the podcast, is in order for us to be able to breed or use assisted reproduction on an endangered species, we always pick a surrogate to work with. So the night that we were out, we were trying to collect a native species that's related to the ornate chorus frog. And we were going to collect those specifically to learn some about their reproductive biology and how we can use assisted repro to reproduce that species and then apply those same methods to ornate chorus frogs. So that night we were actually out for work, but I guess it was really just so much fun that it's hard to consider it work.
Right.
But it really depends, for the most part, average day to day for us is just a normal work schedule. But definitely there are many, many days a year that we are out, late at night doing frog surveys, releasing frogs or salamanders, and
crested toads at midnight.
Yeah, coming in and staying late because they're essentially massaging toads at nighttime, because that's when the peak is, as we described before.
Right.
And then when we do field work, like again, I go to Puerto Rico a couple times a year to do work with crested toads and boas. That requires us to do work at nighttime, and it's not just doing the work at the zoo, taking care of the animals, but it's actually doing the field work to learn more about the species' wild behavior, to learn more about their populations in the wild. We're the ones that are also doing that research that's contributing to science so that we better understand the species. We're doing the same thing with Virgin Island boas. In 2 weeks, I'm going to the British Virgin Islands to survey a couple islands where the boas haven't been documented, and we're hoping to document them there and learn more about their natural behaviors there. So we do it all. It doesn't matter if we have to stay out till midnight or 1 a.m. And then usually we're back at work the next morning at the same time that we're supposed to be scheduled.
Nice. All right. Very cool.
Yeah.
zoo-based conservation efforts. Woohoo! I could listen to that stuff all day. And, one of the things that really stood out to me about that interview was just like how deeply nerdy all of it was, but also just how kind of cool and fun and funny, my guests were. And like Dustin and Shaina were just a lot of fun, and we could joke around about things, but also super brilliant in super specific areas. And I really do hope that they're willing to come back on and talk more about some of the other incredible conservation work done at the North Carolina Zoo, because all of those projects sound absolutely amazing to me. So hopefully that will be a future episode, y'all. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone at the North Carolina Zoo. They've been incredibly accommodating of me and my visits there. And it's so cool to, they've become another one of those facilities where I get to give all these different perspectives, because we're talking to keepers and we're talking to curators and we're talking to conservationists and veterinarians. And it really shows just how much goes on at a zoo. It's really astonishing, and I love it so much. So yeah, thank you to the whole team at the North Carolina Zoo. And I am realizing that this has gone very long, so I'm going to stop rambling now and just quickly say thank you to my Red Panda level patrons, Dr. Laura Schenk, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, and Jenny Owens. Remind you all to come back here on Friday for Rossifari Zoo News, and also remind you all that the word credits backwards is Steiderk. The Rossifari podcast is produced, hosted, and engineered by John Rossi. Editing and fact-checking by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Our theme song is Sevens by Nathan Burke, performed by Nathan and John. Interrupting John theme and additional voices by Taylor Isaac Gray. You can reach John directly on Instagram and Facebook at Rossifari, or by email at rossifaripod@gmail.com. Rossifari is part of the Daydreamer Media Network. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo. Woo! Yay! Conservation-based. Nope. Shoot. Zoo-based conservation, not conservation-based zoo, John.